All right, welcome back, everyone. So we're going to do the second part of the Roman Empire now, or the continuation of it, I should say. And this time we're going to do a little bit different. We're going to start by putting up all the keywords first, so you can get them all down. So those would be like the words I would normally write on the board. Get them all down. You can pause the video to get them all down first, and then after that, we'll go ahead and just go on the lecture. Anytime I say one of those words, get a lot of good notes down. All right, so here we go. Here are all the words. Okay, got them all down? All right, here we go. So we're going to continue on with the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Last time we had talked about Augustus. He was the first emperor. And Augustus, who ruled until he died 14 AD, he was going to be replaced by his next ruler. Now, who the next ruler was actually his son-in-law. He actually told his daughter to marry this man named Tiberius because he wanted Tiberius to be the next emperor. So Tiberius is not actually too significant. You do want to know his name. He ruled from 14 to 37 AD. He doesn't spend too much time ruling in Rome. He actually spent a lot of time on this beautiful little Mediterranean island called Capri. It was nice, it was pretty. Sorry, my wife's making faces in the background. Excuse me. And he spent a lot of time on that island until he died in 37 AD. 37 AD, he's going to be replaced by Caligula. Now, Caligula, he's one of the great stories of the Roman Empire. Caligula starts his reign 37 AD. Some of you may have heard of him, a lot of you may have not have heard of him before, but he was one of those crazy emperors. The first year of his reign, everything was fine. He ruled normally, nothing too dramatic. But about a year into his reign, he started to feel a little bit sick. He was ill for a bit, maybe had coronavirus. I don't know. No, he was seriously, but he was ill for a little bit, and then he recovered physically. Mentally, not so much, because about a year into his reign, after he recovered from his illness, his physical illness, mentally he began to do some really crazy things. Like what? Well, one of the things he started to do as emperor was take all the senators, and the Roman Empire still had senators, remember, and he made them all dress like slaves. And as he made them dress like slaves, every time he walked by, he would force them to bend down and kiss his feet. Now, granted, the senators didn't have the powers they used to have, but they're still, these nobles, the patricians, and to have them to that level, obviously, is not going to go over too well. So he did that at first. Another one of his crazy little things he would manage to do was, by now, Egypt was under the control of Rome as well. Actually, during the time of Augustus, I don't remember if I mentioned this last time, but one of the achievements of Augustus is he conquered Egypt, added Egypt to the Roman Empire. By the way, also, you should probably have your books out, have the maps, look at those. That might help you since I'm not having all the images with these lectures. The books might help you as well if you just follow along in the chapters. So anyways, he was ruler of Egypt, and being ruler of Egypt, he was pharaoh, and then he thought it would be okay for him to have an incestual affair with his sister, which of course didn't go over too well in Rome, but something that Rome, as we know, the Egyptian pharaohs did quite regularly. Another one of his little crazy achievements, not really achievements, but his actions, was to name his horse as a senator, chief senator, actually. He spent tremendous amount of money of the Roman Empire on baths and perfumes and banquets and drinks and more drinks and everything you can imagine, all these kind of crazy parties. He was also just cruel, but his sense of cruelty were things he did that he thought were funny. So, for example, a few things you can note about him is like during the gladiator games, he would remove the canopies during the hottest time of the day and wouldn't let anybody leave because he thought it would be funny to watch everybody just sit there in the heat in the sun. Or another things he would do is force parents to watch the execution of their own children because, again, he thought this was funny. Another thing he might do is on his personal life, and here's another good one. He would actually, not really good, but what he would do is he would actually take, during the gladiator games, an old feeble man. He would take the wildest animal he could find, and he would put him together because he thought it was funny to watch a old man being torn apart by a wild animal. Even in his personal life, as I was going to say, even when he was married, he'd kiss his wife and always kiss her on the neck. And when he kisses her on the neck, afterwards, he would always say something along the lines of, "This beautiful throat I can cut whenever I please." And he would say this very loudly in public places. So anyways, this goes on for a while, and he's still ruling along. Oh, one more of a fun little tidbit about him. He decided that he was going to try to conquer Britain. So he organized his army, gets the Roman legions together, gets them to the sea, the North Sea. He's just about ready to invade England, and then he gives the orders to his soldiers to start collecting seashells. So there you have the Roman legions collecting seashells. What happens? Well, this all takes place in a short time period. I think I mentioned he started in 37 AD. By 41 AD, he managed to upset everybody. So much so that in 41 AD, what ended up happening was that he alienated the one group you're not supposed to alienate, the Praetorian Guard. And when he alienated the Praetorian Guard, they turned against him and they killed him. Now, this is not going to turn into a big civil war because nobody liked Caligula. So he's going to die pretty quickly. They get him out of the scene, and he is going to be replaced by his uncle, Claudius. So Claudius is the next key guy you need to know. Claudius comes in 41 to 54 AD. Claudius was an interesting chap. He was kind of born with a little bit of a birth defect, spoke with a stutter, walked with a limp. He was not very charismatic. One story once I read is that he would throw gold coins out so people would just chant his name, Claudius, we love you, Claudius, we love you. So he had kind of a mixed kind of rulership. Part of his rulership was effective and part had some pretty crazy stories. So let's start with the positive things. One of the things about Claudius that worked really, really well is he did something different than Caligula, which all the money that Rome had, he spent on building projects. So he built roads and canals and bridges and more aqueducts. And one of his great achievements was the aqueducts that we're familiar with. He wasn't the only emperor who built aqueducts, but he's given a lot of credit for them. New cities started to develop all around the Roman Empire. So that was one of his great achievements. The other really great achievement, he does something no one in Roman history has been able to do. He conquers Britain. And by conquering Britain, he adds this piece of real estate that will be under Roman control for hundreds of years. In fact, he was so proud of this, he did this in 43 AD, very early in his reign, that he named his son, who he had shortly after that, Britannicus. And you're going to want to know his name as well, Britannicus. After Britain, of course. So anyways, that stuff's going pretty well. But there were some problems, and that had to do more with his personal life. He was going to get married 4 times. The first 2 wives don't really matter too much. His third wife was a very young woman named Messalina. I believe she was only 15 years old when he married her. And the first 2 wives who married Claudius basically married because he was emperor, he had money, and they wanted to be married to the emperor. The third wife, Messalina, didn't marry him so much for money, but for power. She wanted to try to get her family line in charge of the Roman Empire. Well, Claudius discovered this, and he had her executed, and much of her family. And he, at this point, thinking, I'm done with the women, no more, it's not worth it. But then came wife number 4. And wife number 4 is the most important one, a woman named Agrippina. So Agrippina seduces Claudius, convinces her to marry him. Now, eventually Claudius will die in 54 AD. And when he dies, who should be the next emperor? Well, his son Britannicus. But doubt any of you ever heard of a Roman emperor named Britannicus, and that's because there never was one. And the reason there was never a Roman emperor named Britannicus is because in 54 AD, Claudius is going to die. And what happens is his wife, Agrippina, did something pretty dramatic. You see, Agrippina, before she married Claudius, was married once before. And in the previous marriage, she had her own son, a man named Nero. And so what had happened is Agrippina manipulated the dynastic system to get her son Nero into power as opposed to Britannicus. How she does that and what Nero does when he's in power is something I'm actually not going to lecture on. I have a very good YouTube video that I'm also going to give you. You're going to just watch this YouTube clip on Nero. And when you watch this YouTube video on Nero, you're going to take some notes down. You're not going to need to get the names of all the people and everything, the names of all the senators and politicians or any of that. But when you do watch this video on Nero, I just wanted to kind of get down what Agrippina did to get Nero in power. Some of the things Nero did when he was in power. He was very crazy. He rivaled Caligula in terms of the kind of the madness scale of Roman emperors. And so I want you to watch that video first. After you watch that YouTube video on Nero, then continue on with this video on the emperors that follow him. Okay, so go ahead, watch that video on Nero, and then we'll continue on. Okay, so now you've seen the video on Nero, and what we could do now is begin our next discussion of what happens after Nero's death. So Nero dies, he's the last of the Julio-Claudians. So once again, what we're going to do is we're going to pause here for a second. I'm going to put up the key words. You could get all the key words down, and then all those words you pay attention to as we did this last video. All right, so here we go. Here are the key words this time. Ta-da! And all right, got the key words. Ready? Here we go. All right, so now what we're going to do is go into the next dynasties after the Julio-Claudians. There was a dynasty known as the Flavians. You don't really need to worry about them. I'm just going to give you their names real briefly. From 69 to 96 AD, they were Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian. I'm not going to test you on them or anything, just kind of so you know what's going on in that gap of time. Vespasian is the one who built the Colosseum, kind of cool. But other than that, what we're going to see is what happens after the the Flavian dynasty. And after the Flavian dynasty, we enter really a pivotal moment again in Roman history, what we call the Golden Age of Rome, from 96 to 180 AD. So this is the second part of the Pax Romana, if you remember, during which time there'll be 5 Roman emperors. You'll need to know all 5 of them, what each one did. A couple of them will spend more time than others. There'll be Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. I don't know if you've heard of any of them before. Obviously, Trajan and Hadrian are the ones you're going to need to know the most about, so get a lot of details down on them. But the first one was Nerva. Now, Nerva only was emperor for 2 years, 96 to 98 AD. But he's still important. One of the reasons Nerva is important is he kind of restores a sense of gravitas to the Roman Empire. He treated the senators with respect. He's kind of your anti-Caligula or anti-Nero emperor. He's serious, down to earth, respectful, and restores a sense of decorum to Rome. So that's key. The other thing about Nerva that's interesting is that Nerva only ruled for 2 years. He dies of natural causes, keep that point in mind, and he didn't have a son. So what do you do when you don't have a son? You adopt somebody. And so Nerva will adopt Trajan to be his son, and therefore Trajan, who comes from Spain, will be the next emperor. So Trajan, who comes from Spain, will be the next emperor. He's adopted. And what we're going to see with these emperors, these 5 emperors that I just mentioned, they don't come from a family line. They're all going to adopt one another. They're called the adopted emperors, which helps create this golden age, if you think about it, because therefore, if you can adopt a person, if your son's an idiot, well, you're not stuck with an idiot. You can adopt and pick somebody who's qualified and you think is good. So the other key point I want to say, even for the Pax Romana and the Golden Age, and you're really going to see this in the Golden Age, and you saw this probably in the Nero video from before, this is not a Golden Age for everyone. If you're a Christian, as we saw in the Nero DVD or video, not so good. If you're Jewish, it's not going to be a very good time for you during the Golden Age. So this is just an important point, but one that I want you to remember too. So anyway, so Trajan from Spain. Trajan, again, down to earth like his father, very responsible. But Trajan, unlike Nerva's father, is going to rule a bit longer, 98 to 117 AD. And he's going to do a lot of expansion. He's, in fact, going to conquer a bunch of land north of the Rhine and the Danube. And again, I encourage you to use your book, your textbook, look at the images, look at places of expansion where he conquered. And he conquers a lot of land. Who's living north of the Rhine and the Danube? those Germanic people that you should be reading in the Germania, right? We're going to probably have some sort of discussion on the Germania, either on the discussion board or we'll see what happens when we get back. And so you have the Germania there, and it's during this time they have Tacitus writing about them, exactly during the time of Trajan. So anyways, he conquers a lot of land there, increases the wealth of Rome. What does he do with this money? Well, he uses it for Rome. This is the Golden Age. Just like Claudius, he builds up a lot of things, roads, buildings, aqueducts, bridges. He even creates something called the alimenta, which was public assistance for the poor, which is unique, maybe not unique, but rare in ancient history. He's very popular. He gets a very famous column built for him. You can kind of Google it, called Trajan's Column. Very tall, beautiful column in Italy, not too far away from the Colosseum. Very cool monument. It actually, you'll see in the images of it, depicts kind of his conquest north of the Danube River there. So anyways, Trajan has a very successful reign, conquers land. He dies of natural causes. And again, before he died, he adopted Hadrian. So, Hadrian, he comes into the scene in 117 AD, and Hadrian's important for two reasons. One in the far eastern part of Rome and one in the far western part of Rome. Let's talk about the far western part of Rome first, because one of the things Hadrian is most famous for is Hadrian's Wall. So here again, I really encourage you to kind of find it on Google real quick. Just Google Hadrian's Wall so you can see images of it, because the images are really powerful to understand what he's doing here. So Hadrian's Wall is built in northern England, southern Scotland. I've actually been there. It's really cool. And it's about an 80-mile long wall. And if you see the pictures online, you'll see it's not very, very big today. Most of it's gone. There's just a few feet of it left that are anything that are high, And at the time, it was 80 miles long, 10 feet high. They had Roman soldiers. And if you could see in any of the images, you'll see a lot of times it was built near hills. So you have this massive wall, you have this hill, and you can see anyone coming from ever and ever and ever. And so this was it. And you might also see in some photos some barracks that the Romans built near Hadrian's Wall. And so these barracks, the Roman soldiers slept there, they lived there. And so if somebody tried to invade England from the north, Britain from the north, they would have to cross this massive open area. The Romans would see them coming. They'd have to come up a huge hill, a big mountain, and then deal with these Roman soldiers. So Hadrian's Wall protected Roman control of Britain for a good couple hundred years. Eventually, Rome will lose control of Britain. They'll lose control of everything. But for the time being, this was a very effective defensive system for them. So that's one reason he's important. The other reason Hadrian is important is in the far eastern side of Rome. And this is a piece of real estate we talked about early in the semester. If you remember, the land of Judea. So remember where we talked about the rise of the Jewish people, Israel, Judea, that piece of real estate. And at one point, Hadrian moves military forces into that region. Now, the Romans had already moved in there. Hadrian was not the first to move into Judea. This had happened earlier by earlier Roman emperors. What happened under Hadrian, however, was incredibly important because Hadrian was incredibly brutal to the Jewish people. Why? This is an important topic because we're going to see this again later on with the Christian people and the rise of Christianity in Rome. There's something that Judaism and Christianity share in common. Obviously, I think we mentioned earlier in the semester, Christianity is an offshoot of Judaism, and the key thing they both have in common is that they are a monotheistic religion. And you go, what's the problem? Well, the problem for the Romans at this time, when you have Roman emperors, the Roman emperor wanted to be the top political authority in Rome. And by definition, if you're Jewish or if you're Christian, you can't be the top official in terms of your value structure because that's going to come from God. So the Romans oftentimes saw both Judaism and Christianity as a bit of a threat to their power structure. So they didn't like it. So anyways, earlier, before Hadrian, other Roman emperors entered Judea. They destroyed the second temple that the Jewish people built there. But Hadrian was especially cruel. So one of the things Hadrian did when he became emperor is he outlawed circumcision. Now, circumcision, for anybody who's not aware of this, is a very important event that all Jewish male babies go through. It is part of being the identity of being Jewish. And Hadrian tells the Jewish people in Judea, no more circumcision. Well, obviously, they're not happy about this. So much so that this leads to a rebellion led by a man named Simon Bar Kokhba. So Simon Bar Kokhba leads this rebellion against the Romans, and what does Hadrian do? He uses that as an excuse to crush the Jewish people there. Sends massive forces, and according to some of our primary sources, he killed as many as 500,000 of the Jewish people in Judea. So he kills the population, he outlaws circumcision, and he did one other thing. He took this land of Judea and he renamed it. He renamed it from Israel, or Judea, to Palestine. What is Hadrian doing here by renaming the land, outlawing circumcision, killing the population? This is your real first genocide of the Jewish people. A lot of times people associate this with Hitler later on in history, but this is not something new. This is something that the Romans attempted to do many, many centuries ago. So anyways, that's a pretty awful, tragic part of Hadrian's rule. It's safe to say he's not very well liked by the Jewish people. So Hadrian will eventually die, despite, after doing all these things. And when he dies in the year 138 of natural causes, again, he will be replaced by his adopted son, Antoninus Pius. Antoninus Pius ruled from 138 to 161. What did he do during those years? Nothing. Really didn't do much of anything. You don't even need to worry about him, other than knowing he was one of the adopted emperors, and he dies of natural causes. All right, so Antoninus Pius dies. He adopted his son, Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius ruled 161 to 180. He always thought himself a philosopher, wore a beard all the time, and he did a few important things. I'm not going to go into a lot of details about that. Fought some battles over in Asia Minor. But really, the most interesting and important thing about him is he had a son. And who is his son? Well, if anybody's seen the movie Gladiator, his son was Commodus. And this is important because he has a son, Commodus. It means that when he dies, his son is going to take over. If you've seen the movie Gladiator, God, they've got everything wrong in that movie. Nothing's ever right in that movie. They got the right names, but no, there wasn't some, big conspiracy to change Rome into a republic again. And, there wasn't this whole plan of Commodus who killed his father. It was very dramatic in the movie. Marcus Aurelius died of natural causes. Commodus becomes the next emperor. It is true, if you see the movie, Commodus was an idiot. The way I kind of describe Commodus very often is kind of a drunken frat boy, your stereotypical drunken frat boy. He's not that interested in ruling Rome very effectively, and he now becomes the emperor. What this means when Marcus Aurelius dies is that is the end of our golden age, and it's the end of the Pax Romana. And with the rise of Commodus, this also means this is going to begin the decline of the Roman Empire. Okay, so now let's continue on with what happens after this golden age. So what we're about to enter is what we sometimes call the crisis of the 3rd century. Technically starts in the 2nd century, but we still call it the crisis of the 3rd century, and it picks up when Commodus becomes our new emperor. So Commodus, he's going to rule, let me see what the exact year is, 180 to 192. And as I said, he's kind of a drunken frat boy type person. He's not very ambitious in terms of running Rome very effectively. And unlike the other emperors from the previous 100 years, he will eventually be assassinated. Once he's assassinated, what we start to see is a series of horrible rulers that will govern over the Roman Empire. These series of rulers between the years 235 and 284 are sometimes known as the Baric emperors. Now, I'm not going to go through all of them because there are like 25 of these emperors. What I am going to do is just very quickly read you off what happens in terms of how their reigns end. Keeping in mind that during the Golden Age, we had 5 emperors, 100 years, they all died of natural causes. During the crisis period, this is what happens to our emperors. So the first one rules for a while. Let me find my list here very quickly. Okay, here we go. And then he's murdered by his own army, killed in a civil war, murdered by guards, murdered by guards, murdered by guards, killed in civil war, kills in battle, killed in civil war, murdered by army, dies in captivity, murdered by army, dies of plague, murdered by bodyguard, murdered by army, murdered by army, murdered by army. One may have died naturally, murdered by bodyguard and killed in civil war. So, can you try to imagine every 2 years on the average having a new president of the United States because of, CIA takes one out, or a plague takes one out, or Secret Service takes one out, or a civil war? That's what's going on in Rome for this roughly 50-year period. This is why we call it the crisis of the 3rd century. There's only one name of these guys I will give you, a man named Gallienus. He was one of these Baric emperors. He ruled from 253 to 268. And the fact that he ruled longer didn't mean things were better. I like mentioning him because his rule kind of typifies all the problems during the crisis of the 3rd century and the Baric emperors. So I'm just going to go through a quick list here for you. So, for example, during this time, pirates returned to the Mediterranean Sea, disrupting trade again. Natural disasters. There was an earthquake in Italy and an earthquake in Asia Minor. There was a plague that hit the city of Alexandria. This plague killed maybe half the population of Alexandria, keeping in mind that city had a population of about 1 million people, so 500,000 people killed by that plague. There were about 18 separate assassination attempts on his life, and he will eventually be killed. And so his reign is not that great. It's just that he gets lucky, he lives longer. But really, you see all the problems: the pirates, the earthquakes, the plagues, invasions. That's the other key thing. That one of the things that starts to happen now, really important, is instead of Rome invading other areas, Rome is being invaded. Who invades Rome in this crisis of the 3rd century? Well, those Germanic tribes. And one of the reasons this happens, perhaps, is because Rome is so big, so large, and it's really hard to defend these massive borders. And many people look at this as a moment where the Roman Empire could have just collapsed in the 3rd century. So why does the Roman Empire not collapse? Why does it last another 150 years? Well, that's going to be our story for next time.